Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
I'm very excited about introducing our next guest. And as I said earlier, lots of interest in this on Twitter. But if you do want to make a point or ask a question of our next guest, you simply need only tweet to @RichieAllenShow, email richie@richieallen.co.uk. I'm not going to tell you that again. Lots of comments and lots of really interesting questions coming in already. My next guest is an ethicist at Yale University, and he wrote a book last year. In fact, he's written a couple of books, but his most recent one is called A Dangerous Master: How to Stop Technology from Slipping Beyond Our Control. What a terrific book. It's been incredibly well reviewed. We'll be talking about the book and much more besides. I came across him in the Sunday Mail. And of course, the Daily Mail for our American listeners is a national tabloid in Britain. And you know what tabloids are like. You don't always get the full story from them. But they ran a story on Sunday about rogue Terminator robots which can kill without human orders becoming a reality in just a few years' time. They mentioned a conference that took place in Washington, D.C. over the weekend. And they took out some of the I suppose they took out one or two of the statements made there to make a big sensational story. But there's much to the conference, much more to it than the Mail intimated. Welcoming to the programme, he's in Ottawa at the moment, which I believe is about to be deluged by snow. Let's welcome to the show Wendell Wallach. Wendell, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you very much, Richie. Yes, we're already deluged.
Well, when we were talking before I went to air, you said, Richie, I might have to move on down the road to do this interview in case we get hammered by the snow. It sounds like it's come in, and it's come in hard.
It has. It's only about a foot so far, and Ottawa can handle it.
Yeah, of course it can. We're not used to it here in the northwest of England. We get a little bit every February, but it doesn't stick around too long. We certainly don't get a foot of it. Look, thanks for coming on the programme. Really appreciate that. Huge interest in this subject. Of course, the Daily Mail took the more sensational approach to you and to the conference, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But one of the things I wanted to ask you straight off the bat, because this is so topical at the moment, is, in your own opinion, based on what you've looked at and what you've researched, if we reach 2050, which by my terrible mathematics will be 34 years from now, and if we haven't checked or put a stop to, maybe not put a stop to, but if we haven't regulated this advancement of technology, what sort of a world, Wendell, do you imagine in 35 years?
Well, the way you put it is probably correct. I think the concern for me is only partially about which technologies will be possible over the next 30-odd years. It's probably much more important how we manage their development, how we integrate them into society, or whether we do. So, for example, I think a large percentage, I won't say how large, but even if it's only 20 or 30% of present day jobs no longer exist, that could be a good thing or a bad thing depending on how societies move to change the political, economic climate and make it possible for us to get the money we need to purchase the goods that we want. So that's just kind of one example of how decisions now could alter our future. In the same way as decisions now are going to alter whether we are a very hot planet, maybe a degree or more hotter than we are presently by 2050, or whether we have put significant measures in place to mitigate the worst effects of global climate change. And I could go through technology after technology about what might be possible and what kinds of restraints we have to put in place to ensure that we maximize the benefits and minimize the risks.
Absolutely. I mean, we can come back to the future of employment and whether or not we, our ability to work and not our ability, but our opportunities to work are going to be diminished in the coming decades. But I want to start off with that headline in the Mail newspaper here in London, just to get it out of the way, Wendell, because it's very serious. Because people people are very worried about this. They're very worried about the proliferation, the endless, insatiable appetite that there would appear to be for wars in the Middle East and elsewhere, for any variety of reasons that we could speculate on. And they hear stories about the Pentagon and the Pentagon's technological wing, DARPA, spending all sorts of money in black budgets on equipment, on smart soldiers and robots in the future. And I think people do worry about the possibility that we might see a future where we will have armies of robots, of computers, where they are operating under their own recognizance and making decisions for themselves. How accurate is that? How right are people to be worried about that, or how wrong are they to be worried about that, depending on where you're coming from?
Well, I think people are right to be worried about that, presuming that the United Nations does not put in place measures to ban robots that both pick their own targets and can dispatch people without any immediate human intervention. On the other hand, those discussions are going on. They will go into their third year in April in Geneva. And there are some strong possibilities that we will get a ban in place. But if we don't get a ban in place, all bets are off, because it won't just be robotic armies. It'll be robots that have reflex times much faster than humans can. So nobody's going to want to come up against them. There will be robots that take over the skies. There will be all kinds of different applications, and even the degree of virtue that now exists in being a courageous warrior will disappear, and warfare will be even more ugly than it is today.
Would you trust Wendell? Now, I know you're not you might very well privately be a political animal. You might be somebody who's got a lot of opinions politically, but I know that, you didn't come on here to talk about your political opinions. But would you trust any nation to adhere to any decree coming from the United Nations that you shouldn't, or you shan't, or you must not invest in robot armies? Would you trust people to say, okay, we shouldn't do that?
I would trust most parties to do that, but even as we have had a ban on chemical and biological warfare that has been in place, it's only occasionally been violated, as it has been in Syria more recently. And even then, the moral onus comes down against Syria, and if the opportunity is there, we can be sure that the regime will be punished.
Yeah,
but
I'm not sure about that.
So far, it hasn't been punished, and that's weakened the ban a little bit. But I think in most cases, these bans go into effect because most nations come to realize that it's in their interest if everyone commits to the ban rather than violating it on their own and suffering the consequences.
Now, there might be people listening to us who might say that those who accused the Syrian government of discharging chemical weapons never provided any proof of it. It's the sort of claim and accusation made against countries in the past, namely namely Iraq, for example. It turned out, of course, that he didn't have any weapons. But if we're going down that road, Wendell, and we don't have to go down that road, the United States and its allies used depleted uranium munitions in Iraq in the invasion in 2003, and we know this to be true. And you're quite right to point out, again, these are weapons banned under United Nations conventions, and yet they do it anyway. I suppose that's the point I'm making, going back to the robot thing. Why would we expect, any rogue government, and I would consider our governments rogue, to be honest, in the way they conduct themselves. Why could we trust them? Why would we expect them not to do it? The odds are, it could be argued, the technology is already there, and maybe we just don't know about it.
Well, I think in general, the technology is there in a very crude way. In other words, the systems that now exist don't have any real intelligence. So I'm not so worried about them, or they are largely there for defensive purposes, like taking out a missile that has targeted your ship. So in that sense, the technologies are there, but nobody's worrying so much about the defensive purposes. I would just say that even though you may not be able to trust all parties to follow such ban, and perhaps even our own government on occasions violates the international humanitarian law, or what is sometimes known as the laws of armed conflict, the fact that those bans are in place means that they don't get violated with impunity. I mean, it's not that we're, if a ban is really in place, I don't think we're going to see masses of killer robots unless some large party so obviously violates the ban that it forces everybody else to throw their hands up and say the ban no longer exists.
A couple of interesting tweets on this already. Alex asks, for example, if we had these armies and we put our trust in them, what would happen if somebody was to hack them or hack it? And that's a very good question, that, isn't it? That's a question that needs to be asked if you're going to develop this sort of technology. Surely it's wide open. Yeah,
that's one of the reasons why I think we don't want to develop this kind of technology. This kinds of technology is not going to be fully predictable or fully controllable. And the lack of control is not just that it might be hacked, but also the lack of control is that it may take actions that we never thought it could take in new circumstances. Or just like any complex system, it may just take certain actions that are just were totally unpredictable.
Loads of questions on this, loads of tweets. It's at Richie Allen Show on Twitter, richie@richieallen.co.uk. Wendell Wallach is our guest this hour. It's really good to be getting into this. Wendell's book is A Dangerous Master, How to Stop Technology from Slipping Beyond Our Control. It's available at all good online retailers. Check it out. You need only search for Wendell Wallach. Really good stuff. Wendell, what's the singularity? I mean, I understand the definition of the singularity. What does it mean exactly, this coming time where machines will be able to make decisions for themselves? How far away are we from that?
Well, people differ on how far we are from that. But let me first define the term, and then I'll tell you where I stand in relationship to the concept. It came up a few decades ago when a science fiction writer, Werner Vinge, considered the time when robots would be smarter than humans and then in an intelligence explosion would create other robots that were much smarter than humans. And he realized that that would change so much that he couldn't really even figure out what kind of world it would be. So he turned to a term in mathematics, the singularity, to describe that. A singularity can be a point with no dimension, but the overall point, the original idea of the singularity was merely a time when computers equal and then quickly far exceed human intelligence.
Now, a number of people, knowing you were coming on tonight, they wanted to talk about, and I don't know, we're not going to be able to get into it in great detail because of time constraints, of course, but arguments made, or arguments that continue to be made today about human enhancement technologies, which we're going to come to now, obviously, because obviously this isn't all just about, killer robots and the singularity. But some of the things predicted in Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, for example, where are you on that, Wendell? Where are you on those fears that people have?
Well, I think the fears, again, are overblown, largely because the realization of these technologies is much more difficult than anyone had imagined. The brain is more complex. It's a self-modifying system, so you can maybe enhance it for a while, but it doesn't last. When I first got together with transhumanists around 2001, they were acting as if we were going to have so many different technologies that would radically extend life, that would give us powers of mind and other kinds of capability through drug enhancements and through interfaces to machines. And they expected that all to happen within a decade. Well, we're more than a decade beyond that time, and we've seen some interesting technologies, but nothing even close to what was hyped.
Are you not concerned by any of the developments in that time?
No. I'm concerned about these things, but I think they're coming slower than anticipated, and I think the dangers of researching some of these technologies will turn people off a bit, or may even force certain forms of regulation. So think of a designer baby. It's one thing to select one gene to eradicate a disease that your parents are carrying in an infant. But if you start selecting 7 or 8 different genes that you think will allow a certain capability to come into play, that may have all kinds of effects that you have no idea about, because all traits are not gene specific. So I have a feeling that if people start to experiment too rigorously with designer babies, we're going to have the equivalent of the thalidomide scandal of the 1950s, where there'll be all kinds of malformed children, and there will be laws that will come down which will make it quite difficult to move ahead with that research. Does that mean it won't happen? No, it will happen. It will happen in rogue nations. People will do certain experiments. Some experiments will succeed that were meant to alleviate diseases, but could also be used for enhancements. But that's coming slowly.
You say slowly, but there are a lot of people listening to this program, and there are other academics in this field of research whom are talking about the manipulation of us as sentient, as sovereign beings, into a transhumanist society where us as people and technology will be kind of seamlessly fused, and that it's going to change the face of humanity as a whole. Now, you know that that's not a ludicrous conspiracy theory. When I say that, I'm not putting words in your mouth, but a lot of learned men and women believe this, and they say that.
Some friends who believe that, yes.
And the reason I'm beginning to believe that, Wendell, because I used to be at a place in my life where I looked at stuff like this and went, all right, this is about money here, this is about money there, this is genuinely about advancement, this is very interesting. Scientists do what scientists do. They want to constantly push the barriers and see where they can go. But when we look at what's happening with smart technology, for example, and the advent of smartphones, you will probably be aware that over 2/3 of British men, women and children own a smartphone. I'm guessing it's probably around the same number or the same figure in the US. I can't be sure of it, but it's about that. And you know that scientists, men and women like yourself, qualified men and women like yourself, are saying that this is potentially having, right under our noses, a devastating effect on our brains, on our characters, on our personalities, on who we are. I'm going to quote from Susan Greenfield. I mentioned this to you earlier on. She runs the research agency Childwise, and she spoke to the House of Lords in London last year. That's the Peers there. It's the upper chamber in Parliament. I know you know this, Wendell, just in case our listeners don't know. It's the upper chamber, the House of Lords. She said that basically children spending 5 hours, 20 minutes a day in front of the television and their computers, and that by the mid part of this century, we might see infantilization. Our mind might be infantilized, and it would be characterized by short attention spans, sensationalism, inability to emphasize, and a shaky sense of identity. These are very, very, very worrying things. Where are you on this?
Well, I think that perhaps is happening to some people. But I think, as with nearly every technology we've looked at so far, there are benefits and there are detriments. So I'm a product of a generation who watched television for 5 hours a day, and I'm not sure that it made me totally stupid. It has made me stupid in some ways, and I probably waste an inordinate amount of time. But smartphones, yes, they are undermining our attention span. On the other hand, they're making useful information available to us instantaneously, presuming that's what we want to do, presuming that's what we want. So I'm concerned about what the cognitive effects of this constant shift in attention is, but it's also not clear to me that the book is written. We are actually at a very early stage in the adoption of these technologies, and we may decide to adjust to them in different ways once we start to recognize what the downsides are. But I do get concerned that they are detrimental to some people, if not all of us.
I mentioned also earlier on Nicholas Carr, the technologist, the American technologist, who said, and he wasn't alone in saying this, that he has a feeling that someone or something has been tampering with his brain, remapping the neural circuitry and reprogramming the memory. And that's where we do get into the realms of what some people might call conspiracy theory, what others might say, well, we can't help but looking at this. There are people, Wendell, and I'm increasingly becoming one of them. I have to admit that. I put my cards on the table. I'm always honest. I believe that this is an intended consequence of this technology. I cannot believe that this is an unintended consequence that we're seeing in infantilized adults, basically, inability to emphasize a shaky sense of identity, narcissism, which wasn't mentioned by Susan Greenfield, but of course it's very important, isolation almost. I have to speculate, or I have to at least look at the possibility that that's an intended consequence of the advent and the rollout of this technology. What do you think?
Well, I think the intended consequences is for certain classes of people to maximize their gain or their control or their reward. But I've never felt that it has to go through a process of calculation by anyone for this to occur. This is just, capitalist economies want to turn us into consumers. They need to turn us into consumers. So those who are going to profit the most from us being consumers will obviously adopt every tool they can to make us better consumers. So in that sense, this is happening whether it's an intended conspiratorial thing or whether it's just a natural byproduct of some of the predominant values within our political economic culture. In the 1930s, there was a group called the Frankfurt School, and they were Marxists of their day, but they were cultural Marxists. And they had the viewpoint that the function of culture in capitalism was to woo us into unconsciousness. So what you're suggesting is that we are, or at least a large portion of some of the time, we are being wooed or manipulated into unconsciousness. I don't think it's an explicit manipulation, but the effect may be the same.
Yeah, what I'm suggesting, I suppose, is that that we're supposed to be, or that there is a plan to connect us kind of permanently to the so-called smart grid, because all of these smart technologies are designed to communicate with one another. And ergo, if we spend all of our time connected to one of these devices, and you know, Wendell, that, and our listeners are tweeting this out, and emailing it in, that they're now talking about smartphones of the future that will actually be chips, that will be devices that can be connected to the temples or to the neck or to the body. And I've got real reservations about that and what that might be really all about. I mean, who would want to connect us to a grid or a cloud, for example? We hear about this all the time, Bluetooth, the smartwatches, Google Glass. They talk about skin patches that would attach an electronic circuit to the skin and then will communicate with computers. Who dreams that stuff up? That really is sinister to me.
Well, I know an awful lot of people who talk about that technology because they see it as utopian.
Yeah.
They see that this is how they personally will transcend the limits of being human. So transhumanist body will be able to shed our bodies, which are prone to disease, or will be able to live much longer. Our minds will be free to travel in the many worlds of cyberspace. And I hear those dreams from very successful people. So I don't think it's just being dreamed up, as you would suggest, by those who want to manipulate us. I think there are many people who truly invest their dreams in these possibilities. And some of these possibilities have, or at least some of these dreams have been around for thousands of years, such as the dream of immortality. It's just the form it's taking is more caught up in technological possibility.
And you know what? I wouldn't argue with that. I think you're absolutely right. I think you described that very well. I would agree with that. There are entrepreneurs, there are scientists, there are venture capitalists. You can give them any name you want, of people who want to push the envelope to see what it is that we can do. I have no doubt about that. What I'm suggesting as a possibility, and I said to you earlier on when we had a kind of a pre-chat before you coming on, that proof, of course, is very difficult. I can only speculate based on what I see, but I would suggest that, particularly with the Pentagon DARPA wing, that there is a more sinister aspect to it. Not necessarily all the men and women out there in the laboratories thinking, well, what can we do now? Maybe we can invent something that will help somebody see further. Maybe we can invent something that's going to help somebody have, more, a better clarity of thought in the office or in the boardroom or whatever. I've no doubt about that. But what I'm suggesting is that it would appear that there's another agenda, a hidden agenda, that is piggybacking on that, or maybe, is covertly supporting and funding that for other more sinister means. Control being a very, being a very obvious one, Wendell. You wouldn't discount that, would you?
Well, I really don't know. I mean, I don't have the kind of information that would make me jump on that. There are certainly sinister people in this world, and sinister people can come up with all kinds of different clever agendas that they think will be in their own interest. So I do think, yes, there are a lot of people who are doing things that they think that will be in their interest, or they think will be in their interest, that will not necessarily be in the interest of the great mass of us, or even most middle-class citizens. So that's what starts to concern me, when these agendas get pushed that may provide power or immortality to a few individuals at the expense of the rest of humanity.
I'm going to leave this thread now and move on to something else in the 10 or so minutes that we have left, by the way, and thanks for coming on the programme. It's 25 minutes to the top of the hour. If you're just joining the programme, our guest this hour is Wendell Wallach. He is an ethicist at Yale University, and he wrote the book, A Dangerous Master, How to Stop Technology from Slipping Beyond Our Control. It's available at all good online retailers. You see, I get worried when people connected to this, like Kevin Warwick at Reading University, says something like, if a machine is passing down signals that keeps you completely happy, then why not be part of the matrix? That wasn't a throwaway comment designed to get a giggle. He meant that, Wendell. And others like him mean that. That to me, without trying to sensationalise things, we don't like doing that. That's a terrifying thing to hear that.
Well, it is, but it's also overly romanticized. I mean, I think some people would like to have the freedom of their mind moving, in cyberspace. I can understand that, at least as a dream. But even Kevin Warwick knows how much work he had to put in to just get one little sensor in his arm to act at his will, at his intention. He had to work for weeks just to get that one little electrode he'd implanted to give out a signal when he wanted it to give out a signal. So I think, yes, these dreams are there. Some of it will be realized, but it's probably coming a little slower than many of these dreamers hope. And there's an awful lot of hype and fantasy out there posing as science. There's an awful lot of theories out there posing as science. Which of those will be realized? Which will come quickly? Well, I didn't expect the cell phones to come as quickly as they did, so I'm not sure I could guess which technologies and which theories will truly pan out and which will turn out to be blind alleys.
I'm delighted you're on the programme, Wendell. It's terrific. It's great to have your point of view on this. I'm sure it was a very interesting conference over the weekend in DC. I'm delighted that somebody like you is asking the questions about the morality of this and who's going to oversee it. Where's the oversight? And that's important. And we can talk about that now in a second, because that's really important. I respectfully disagree with you only on the point of what it's intended for. I believe there is a sinister agenda here. I've come to believe it over a period of time. I never thought I'd be thinking like that, let alone saying it out loud, that there is an agenda to connect us to machines and to this cloud and this smart grid. I think it's very sinister. I'm not going to get into too much of it now because our listeners are used to hearing my opinion on it. And that's where, I think it's only where we part company. But I'm going to read a few tweets out because this has really got a lot of traction on our Twitter account tonight. Wayne was on to say that people who seek immortality are in denial of their own nature as well as those who seek to control others. Martin was on to say that he teaches at college and he can confirm the lack of attention span because of phones. Their phone is their life. Transhumanism is the agenda. And Lisa emailed us, Wendell, to say that she believes, in her opinion, she says she doesn't have any proof of it, but she speculates that the rollout of smartphone technology, what that was really all about was to get people addicted to technology. And she points out in a long email, where does it ever end for people? They've got the Samsung 5. The Samsung 6 doesn't do anything different really, except it might have a fingerprint scanner. That's a bit sinister, she says. But they have to have that. They become addicted to technology. That becomes like their drug. That's a good point, that. Is that something that concerns you, Wendell? We saw this film about Steve Jobs, for example. Now, Wendell, I'm sure Steve Jobs is a smart man. He's probably a far brighter man than I am. But why do we worship a guy like Steve Jobs who made a device that you can listen to music on? That's a bit weird to me, that. Why do we worship that, that industry, that man from within that industry? And does Lisa have a point that we're being manipulated into becoming addicted to technology? What do you think?
Well, we're either being manipulated or people are finding a way to play to our desires or our hopes or our pleasures. I would hope that that's being done in a way, or for most of your listeners, that they're attentive enough to that they are not totally trapped by the dopamine hits they get from emails coming in or from having immediate access to their favorite songs whenever they can get that. So there is always that addictive capability there. But the addictive capability is also caught up in the fact that these are our pleasures. These are what we want. So it wasn't just somebody trying to get us addicted. We elected to be addicted because we saw either advantages or pleasures that we could get out of the technologies we took on. There are technologies that have failed. The smartphone has succeeded because it's given so many different possibilities to people. But yes, it's made us inattentive. If you have a smartphone on a class, you're probably not listening to your professor.
No, you're not. One of the things, we're a couple of regular guys. You're a college professor. I'm a journalist. English and history is what I majored in, I told you earlier on. And there we are. You and I can have a discussion and we can disagree. That's a very human thing to do, that. I've certainly not researched this as much as you have. I'm the first to admit that. But I have my opinions. And we can disagree in a friendly manner. We could be robust and we'd still have a discussion. But isn't the smart technology designed to prevent that very thing happening? We discussed just before we came on air, you and I, that one of the things we're seeing is this I don't know, this kind of global narcissism. Social media is far from social. I'll go on social media and I'll say something about something. And really what happens then is a series of people validate what I've said. Wendell, there's hardly any discussion there or any argument or any debate, robust or otherwise. That's got to be a very, very negative effect of the rollout of that technology. And of course, most of the time you're on a train or on a bus or in in any mode of public transport, people are not listening to music anymore. I'm a bit of a voyeur, Wendell. I'm watching what people are doing, and I'm seeing that what they're actually doing is they're telling people what it is they're doing on Facebook. I'm on a bus. I'm doing this. Now, I'm guilty of this myself. That's very negative, that.
Yeah, no, I find it sad that we're creating a culture that plays to our lower instincts or doesn't really nurture our better selves. And I agree with you that that's often what's happening here. So, in that sense, I'm sad to see so much of that, but I'm a little confused about whether that's because we're in a transitional period of history and we've been mesmerized by the gadgetry, and we will make adjustments, or whether we're just going down a road where there'll be crisis after crisis, and we'll be so caught up in responding, and we will not deal with the challenges at hand that we lose the opportunity to give form to our future. And that's largely what a dangerous master is about, how through ethics and engineering and oversight we can give form to our technology and not let the technological possibilities dictate humanity's destiny.
And that's really important, Dan. I want to mention again A Dangerous Master, How to Stop Technology from Slipping Beyond Our Control, available at all good online retailers. In the couple of minutes we have left, Wendell, then, we come to that now then. Again, you've gotten an impression, I suppose, of me since we began talking. I've got a very definite point of view about what's really behind this. You understand that.
Sure.
How could we possibly trust... I mean, I'm somebody who doesn't advocate voting. I don't believe in the democratic system as we have it, because it isn't designed for me or you or anybody else to choose people to go to City Hall or to go to Congress or to Parliament to work on their behalves. We know this doesn't work like that anymore. It hasn't for a long time. Special interest groups and massive corporations control who we get to vote for and who becomes president, who becomes the mayor, and so on, so on, so on, so on. So how could we possibly trust then any sort of oversight as dictated to us or given to us by elected officials? How could we trust the incoming US government, whether it's going to be a Hillary Clinton-led White House or whether it's going to be a Donald Trump or a Ted Cruz White House? How could you possibly take it seriously? I don't mean you personally, but anybody take it seriously if they said, well, we're going to keep an eye on this, we're going to watch this very closely, the advancement of technology, so that it doesn't hurt people, so that it doesn't affect humanity. How could we trust that, Wendell, knowing the lobby system for what it is, what these companies are, who they really are? Surely oversight is a pipe dream.
Well, if you've watched what's going on in America, it looks like the parties, and in many cases the powers that be, have lost control of the electorate. So it's clear that a large percentage of people no longer trust the political parties here, no longer trust the government system to solve its problems. They've witnessed 5 decades of stagnant wages, if not the loss of work. So I think the distrust is already there. So the question is not necessarily whether we're trusting a government or whether we can become the informed citizens to dictate to our governments what we need and want.
Will we ever reach that stage where we, democracy, the founding fathers of the United States?
Well, I think we're either going to reach that stage or we're about to have what a philosopher called a legitimation crisis, where people so totally lose faith in their governmental systems to meet their needs that you have some form of instability and perhaps the collapse of support for institutions. And I think we're flirting with that right now. The main question is really whether those who have power or are in charge respond enough to diffuse that dissatisfaction. And diffusing that dissatisfaction may be some distribution of income that is not happening right now because it's all going to the top 1%, or some other means. It doesn't necessarily mean you stop the people who have power from having power, but you have the potential to at least whittle that away because they're concerned about what will happen if the political system collapses.
Yeah, and it's amazing that 1% is actually about 70 individuals, which is incredible, really, holding more than half the world's wealth, as was proven by international charity Oxfam recently. Wendell, It's a fascinating...
It's really 1% of 1%, when you look at it.
That's absolutely right. Fascinating subject. Really enjoyed you coming on the programme. I want to give a shout out again to the book, which is A Dangerous Master, How to Stop Technology from Slipping Beyond Our Control. Wendell, I hope you're right. I hope that your optimism is well founded and that, common sense prevails and that some of this technology, which isn't designed ultimately for our greater good, namely the robots and military aspect of all this. I hope that eventually people take power back enough that they can, that they can put a stop to all of that. Terrific having you on the programme, by the way. I hope you stay safe there in Ottawa and the snow doesn't impede on you too much there. Thanks for coming on the programme.
Thank you very much for having me, Richie.
It was an honour. Wendell Wallach on the line to us there from Ottawa in Canada at 12 and a half minutes to the top of the hour. I had a couple of emails from people during that. And we always get these when we bring people like Wendell on. Richie, why do you bring somebody on the programme like that and he doesn't either understand or he doesn't agree with the transhumanist agenda? He doesn't want to talk about DARPA and stuff like that. Because it's very important not to be ignoring people based on the idea or based on the fact that we don't agree with them or that we end up at a different conclusion to them. This is a very interesting guy. He's a Yale University professor. He knew full well that the programme is associated with David Icke, and he knows about David Icke. We spoke about this earlier on, and Jim Marrs and others. But he's interested in debate and he's interested in talking about these things. And I think there's great value in bringing people on like that. This programme is different. We're not going to be constantly inviting people on the programme whom understand what we think or what we feel is happening and agree with us. Where's the fun in that? I'm interested in listening to guys like Wendell and trying to understand where it is or how it is that he came to formulate his opinions and what he thinks about this agenda. Interesting guy, I think. Very interesting guy.